Ivy from, I'm sorry. Recognize the ranking member for unanimous consent request.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I ask unanimous consent to introduce into the record a statement from the United Steelworkers, a written testimony of Elizabeth Skerry from the Regulatory Policy Associate at Public Citizen, a letter from the Center for Progressive Reform, a letter from the Coalition for Sensible Safeguards, an alliance of over 150 labor, scientific, research, good government, faith, community, health, environmental, and public interest groups, and an article from The Hill entitled, Buttigieg Calls on Trump to Back Reversing Deregulation in Wake of Train Derailment.
Although these may be unanimous consent requests in need of scrutiny, I hear no objection, and so ordered. Who would the ranking member prefer? Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. On February 3rd, 50 freight train cars carrying hazardous material derailed, as we know, in a fiery crash on the borders of East Palestine, Ohio, sending toxic chemicals into the surrounding air, soil, and creeks. This incident, in my mind, highlighted the influence of corporate lobbying on railway safety. And I have a bill that you've heard about called the Stop Corporate Capture Act that would lessen corporate influence in the rulemaking process and clear a path for increased public participation. Listening to these comments today, I think the problem is not that regulatory agencies don't have the expertise or should not have a role in regulation. It's that the ledge branch and the rulemaking branch both are too often controlled by special interests, by big corporate lobbying money, and I've got a bill to address that larger issue as well on the legislative side. It's called the Anti-Corruption and Public Integrity Act, and it addresses the legislative side. So, Professor Hammond, I just want to dive into this a little bit and see if we can understand exactly what's happened here in the railway industry as an example. Powerful railway lobbyists have spent over $700 million in the past 25 years to cut costs, weaken safety regulations, and strengthen their bottom line. This is at the same time they've been making record profits, by the way. Just as an example, Norfolk Southern paid out $18 billion in stock buybacks and dividends. And at the same time, we've got this weakening of regulation. And I wanted to talk about the Obama-era safety rail regulations as an example that arose from a 2008 Southern California train wreck that killed 25 people and injured 135 others. Can you give us some insight into how frequently lobbyists successfully encourage the administration to scale back or delay implementation?
I don't have an exact number for you, but certainly the evidence is extensive that this is a constant effort by the railroad industry in this particular example, and then of course by other industries with respect to other agency rulemakings.
And talk to me about the PTC, the automated braking technology, and the PTC, which debuted in 1990. In fact, I think it was on the kind of most wanted list of things to do back in 1990 when that technology emerged. But it took 30 years to actually implement. Can you give us some understanding of what happened in that process?
Just briefly, what I understand is that there was an initial support from the railroad industry, but once it became apparent that this would be actually a requirement, there was a decades-long effort to resist it.
So in 2014, Obama also proposed stricter rules for trains that transport petroleum and other hazardous materials. And in 2015, he issued a regulation that required trains carrying highly flammable liquids to be regulated. That met with opposition from whom?
The railroad industry.
The railroad industry. In fact, Norfolk Southern, among others, said that requiring these brakes was, quote, not in the public interest. Do you know, Professor Hammond, what happened next in 2015 when the Republicans came in?
I believe that the rule did not go into effect.
Correct. The Republicans introduced the FAST Act, and it simply proposed a cost-benefit analysis of these electronic braking systems that had been out there for more than 20 years, and killed a lot of people, but apparently we wanted to do a cost-benefit analysis. And then in 2018, the rule was repealed by the Trump administration. And they issued a rule to remove the advanced braking system. And in fact, in the House, the new GOP chair of the Transportation Committee was the Chamber's top recipient of industries, or is the Chamber's top recipient of industries campaign cash. Norfolk Southern's general counsel, do you know what his background was?
I don't.
Okay, let me tell you. He was the person who pressed for safety waivers, and he is the former executive director of the National Transportation Safety Board. Tell us what the National Transportation Safety Board does.
It indeed regulates the safety.
It regulates the safety of these trains. So it's actually the current body that's investigating the company. So I guess I want to take this in our last minutes to the Stop Corporate Capture Act and ask you, in my bill, we enhance the public's notice and comment influence through the Office of the Public Advocate. How would an increase in public participation improve the rulemaking process?
It would bring more voices that could be counteracting this extensive, very expensive, consistent effort by industry to capture the process.
And bring us the voices of the people on the ground that we are sworn to
General,
protect.
ladies.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And also, Mr. Chairman, may I ask unanimous consent to enter into the record a number of items. The first is a letter of support for the Stop Corporate Capture Act. The second is an oil and gas, an article on how oil and gas lobby buries the findings of negative impacts of fossil fuels. The third is a letter from All Aboard Ohio on Norfolk Southern's influence on safety regulations. And the fourth is a study on the presence and influence in lobbying on SEC rulemaking that shows that the influence of lobby groups outweighs public comments.
Without objection.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
The gentlelady yields back. The gentleman from North Carolina.